The restaurant where we held my graduation party, Castellino's, was the kind of place where the waiters wore bow ties and knew exactly how to fold your napkin when you left for the restroom. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow that made even the oldest relatives look younger. The air smelled of truffle oil and old money, my mother's natural habitat. This night was supposed to be my moment of triumph. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Grueling years of balancing full-time work and a full course load at Riverside Community College, I had finally graduated with my associate's degree in business administration, a 4.0 GPA, perfect attendance, president of the Student Business Association. I had done everything right. I looked across the long table at my mother, Eleanor Chen, impeccably dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than my entire tuition. She was engaged in animated conversation with her friend Vivian, both of them laughing a bit too loudly, wine glasses perpetually half full. For 22 years, I had lived in the shadow of my mother's expectations. Eleanor Chen, the self-made real estate mogul who had clawed her way up from middle-class obscurity to become one of the most successful women in our city. She owned 3 homes, drove a car that cost more than most people's houses, and never failed to remind me that anything less than Ivy League was failure. When I was 17, I applied to 11 prestigious universities. My grades were excellent, but not perfect. My extracurriculars were impressive, but not extraordinary. When the rejection letters started coming in, one after another, my mother didn't hide her disappointment. This is what happens when you waste time with those art projects instead of focusing on what matters. The final blow came when I was waitlisted at Princeton, her alma mater. The morning I checked the portal and saw the status, I felt physically ill. I knew what it meant. I had failed at the one thing that mattered most to her, carrying on her legacy of excellence. Community college was my idea. I'll take 2 years. There get perfect grades, then transfer to a good school. It's the smart financial decision, too. I can save money and still get where I want to go. She had looked at me like I'd suggested dropping out entirely. Community college is for people who don't have options, Alex. We have options. The we felt especially pointed. She had options. She had money. She had connections. And in her mind, those should have been enough. But I stood my ground. I enrolled at Riverside against her wishes. I found a job at a local tech startup doing social media management. I rented a tiny studio apartment that I could barely afford, refusing the cushier option of living in her guest house. I was determined to make my own way. For 3 years, I took an extra year to complete a special business certification. I barely saw my mother. Our interactions were limited to tense holiday dinners and the occasional text message exchange. But I didn't mind. For the first time in my life, I was living on my own terms. And surprisingly, I was thriving. Riverside Community College wasn't what I expected. It wasn't filled with unmotivated students or checked-out professors as my mother had warned. Instead, I found a diverse community of people genuinely dedicated to improving their lives. My classmates were single parents, full-time workers, veterans, immigrants, all pursuing education despite significant obstacles. My professors weren't failed academics. They were passionate educators who took genuine interests in their students' success. In that environment, I blossomed. My business professors recognized my potential and pushed me harder than anyone ever had. Dr. Rivera, my economics teacher, became a mentor. You have a gift for seeing the bigger picture. Have you thought about applying to top business schools? After this, I hadn't. I had assumed that door was closed to me forever, but Dr. Rivera believed otherwise. She stayed after class with me for weeks, helping me craft applications to transfer programs. We polished my personal statements until they shone. We gathered glowing recommendation letters from professors who had seen my work ethic firsthand. And in secret, without telling my mother, I applied to Harvard Business School's special transfer admission program. The application process was grueling. I spent countless nights hunched over my laptop, rewriting essays until my fingers cramped. I practiced interview questions in front of my bathroom mirror until I could answer them in my sleep. all while maintaining my 4.0 GPA, working 30 hours a week, and leading the Student Business Association. When the email from Harvard arrived, I was sitting alone in my apartment eating ramen noodles straight from the pot. The subject line was innocuous. Update on your application status. I almost didn't open it, afraid of what it might contain. When I finally clicked, the first word I saw was congratulations. I screamed so loudly my neighbor knocked on the wall. I had done it. I had been accepted to Harvard Business School. Not just accepted, but offered a substantial scholarship. Based on my academic performance and leadership potential, the email mentioned specifically how impressed they were with my journey from community college to Ivy League, noting that it demonstrated exceptional perseverance and intellectual growth. My first instinct was to call my mother. Despite everything, I wanted to share this triumph with her. I wanted to see pride in her eyes just once. But then I remembered her dismissive tone whenever I mentioned Riverside. I remembered how she had stopped mentioning my education to her friends, as if my choice was something shameful, and I made a different decision. I decided to wait. My graduation party was only 2 weeks away, a celebration she had reluctantly agreed to host after pressure from my Aunt Helen, her younger sister, and the only family member who had consistently supported my choices. I would tell her then. In person, with the acceptance letter in hand, it would be a moment of vindication, of proving that my path, though different from hers, was just as valid. For 2 weeks, I kept the secret. I went to work, finalized my graduation requirements, and helped my aunt with party preparations. I printed the acceptance letter and placed it in a simple white envelope, which I carried with me everywhere, afraid my mother might somehow find it if I left it at home. The night of the party arrived. 40 people gathered at Castellino's. Family members, a few friends, and a significant number of my mother's business associates. I noticed immediately that none of my professors had been invited, despite the list I had given my mother. There were no classmates from Riverside either. The guest list made it clear this was her event, not mine. Still, I tried to enjoy the evening. My Aunt Helen hugged me tightly when I arrived. "I'm so proud of you, kiddo. What you've accomplished is amazing." My cousin Jamie gave me a high five, and my elderly grandfather patted my hand with genuine affection. There were pockets of warmth in the room, even if my mother's chill threatened to freeze everything. Dinner was served 5 elaborate courses that my mother had personally selected. The conversation flowed around me, rarely including me. I heard my mother telling Vivian about her recent trip to France, about the new development deal she was working on, about everything except her child's graduation. Then came the moment I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. My mother stood up, tapping her knife against her crystal champagne flute. The chiming sound cut through the conversation, and all eyes turned to her. She looked stunning. As always, her black dress was perfectly tailored, her jewelry subtle but obviously expensive. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, not a strand out of place. She was the picture of success, of having arrived. And when she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. I'd like to say a few words. First, thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate with us. She paused, surveying the room with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. As you know, Alex has completed a program at Riverside Community College. The way she said it, like she was describing a summer camp, rather than a rigorous academic program, made my stomach tighten. I felt my Aunt Helen stiffen beside me. Oh, this is certainly a step. I want to assure everyone that Alex will be moving on to better things. I've already spoken to some contacts at State University about possible enrollment for the fall semester. My head snapped up. This was news to me. She had done what? Because let's be honest, community college doesn't really count as real college. It's more like college with training wheels. A few of her friends chuckled. Most guests looked uncomfortable. My Aunt Helen's face was flushed with anger, but all I could focus on was the burning sensation spreading through my chest. 3 years of hard work, 3 years of proving myself, 3 years of growth and learning and transformation, and she had dismissed it all in a single sentence. The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for my reaction. Would I burst into tears? Would I storm out? Would I cause a scene that would give them something to gossip about at their next dinner party? Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was genuine. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "Thank you for sharing your perspective, Mom," I said, and I was shocked at how steady my voice sounded. I walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of her. Her triumphant expression flickered, confusion creeping in at my lack of an emotional reaction. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out the envelope I had been carrying for 2 weeks. I placed it gently on the table in front of her. "Before this goes any further," I said, my voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear, "you should read this." Then I turned and walked toward the door of the private dining room. As I pushed it open, I heard it a gasp, so sharp and sudden, it sounded like someone had been punched. It wasn't just surprise, it was shock. It was the sound of my mother's carefully constructed narrative about me crumbling to dust. The Harvard seal on the acceptance letter was unmistakable, as were the words "We are pleased to inform you" in bold black type at the top of the page. But it was the scholarship offer, a prestigious named fellowship that would cover almost all of my expenses, that had caused her to make that sound, because it was the same fellowship she had applied for 25 years ago and been denied. As the door swung shut behind me, sealing me off from that tableau of stunned faces, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by my mother's expectations or disappointments. I had followed my own path, and it had led me further than I ever thought possible. That gasp was the sound of a narrative shifting. It was the sound of respect being born from the ashes of condescension. It was the sound of my mother realizing that the child she had underestimated had surpassed even her lofty standards, not by following her prescribed path, but by blazing an entirely new one. To understand the depth of her shock, you have to understand the depth of her conviction. A conviction I had spent 22 years trying to overcome. 20 years ago, my mother arrived in this country with nothing but a suitcase and a Princeton acceptance letter. Her family had scraped together every penny they had to send her to America, betting everything on her exceptional mind. She never forgot that sacrifice. She worked herself to exhaustion, graduating at the top of her class while working 3 part-time jobs. She built her real estate empire through sheer force of will, never taking no for an answer, never showing weakness. Her story was the stuff of immigrant legend, the kind of bootstrapping narrative that Americans love to celebrate. And in many ways, I admired her tremendously for it. But her success became a shadow I could never escape. In her mind, the only acceptable path was the one she had taken: prestigious university, high-powered career, visible success. Community college didn't fit that narrative. It represented to her a step down, a compromise, a failure. What she never understood was that for me, it represented freedom. Freedom to find my own way. Freedom to make mistakes and learn from them. Freedom to discover what I truly wanted, not what was expected of me. My journey to that moment of vindication began long before I even considered college. To truly grasp how significant that Harvard acceptance letter was, you need to understand the relationship I had with my mother. Relationship built on impossibly high standards and conditional love. Growing up as the only child of Eleanor Chen meant living under a microscope. Our home, a sprawling modern mansion in the exclusive Lakeside Heights neighborhood, felt more like a high-performance training facility than a place of comfort. From the moment I could read, there were educational flashcards at breakfast. My preschool applications were researched with the intensity most people reserve for choosing a heart surgeon. When I was 8, my mother hired Mrs. Abernathy, a former Olympic gymnastics coach, to assess my athletic potential. After watching me attempt cartwheels for 15 excruciating minutes, she delivered her verdict: the child has no exceptional physical gifts. My mother didn't speak to me for 2 days afterward, as if my average coordination was a personal betrayal. By 12, my after-school schedule was planned with military precision. Monday, advanced math tutoring. Tuesday, Mandarin lessons despite the fact that my mother never spoke her native language at home. Wednesday, piano with Dr. Richter, who made me play the same measure 50 times if I hit one wrong note. Thursday, debate club. Friday, sat prep U 6 years early. Weekends weren't for relaxation or friends. They were for academic competitions. Volunteer work that would look good on college applications. And elaborate social events where I was paraded before my mother's colleagues as evidence of her successful parenting. Alex is ranked first in the state mathematics competition, she would announce, her hand gripping my shoulder too tightly. Just last week, the principal called to discuss accelerating their curriculum. I learned early that my achievements weren't celebrated, they were expected, and they were never quite enough. When I was 14, I won second place in a prestigious national essay contest. Most parents would have been ecstatic. My mother's response, "What happened with first place?" I remember stammering something about the winner being a senior with more experience. She just sighed and said, "Excuses don't build success, Alex." That same year, during parent-teacher conferences, my English teacher raved about my creative writing talents. "Alex has a remarkable gift for storytelling," Ms. Thompson told my mother. "There's real passion. There's something that can't be taught." On the drive home, I waited for my mother to mention it. When she finally spoke, it was only to say, "Creative writing won't get you into Princeton. Focus on your science grades." By 16, I had developed what my one real friend, Zoe, called achievement armor. On the surface, I was the perfect student straight as leadership positions, community service hours that would make a saint look lazy. But inside that, armor was a teenager who had never learned how to fail, how to take risks, or how to find joy in the journey rather than the destination. When college application season arrived junior year, my mother was ready. She hired a $500 per hour admissions consultant, who had allegedly helped place 17 students at Harvard the previous year. My personal essays were drafted, redrafted, and polished until any trace of my authentic voice had been erased. My extracurricular activities were strategically curated to create the perfect narrative for admissions committees. "You need a spike," the consultant explained, using industry jargon for a standout achievement. "Everyone has good grades and test scores. What's your differentiator?" The question haunted me. What was my spike? What made me special? After 16 years of doing exactly what was expected of me, I had no idea who I actually was or what I genuinely cared about. In the end, my applications went out with essays about my passion for sustainable business practices and my commitment to cross-cultural economic development topics I had selected because they sounded impressive, not because they meant anything to me. The rejections started arriving in March of my senior year. Yale, waitlisted. Columbia, denied. Stanford, denied. With each thin envelope or terse email, my mother's disappointment grew more palpable. She began canceling social engagements, as if my failure was a contagious disease she might spread. Princeton, her alma mater, and my non-negotiable school, kept us waiting until the very end. I still remember sitting at our kitchen island, staring at my laptop, my mother standing behind me like an execution witness. When I clicked the link and saw "We regret to inform you," I felt her physically recoil. "I don't understand," she said, her voice hollow. "We did everything right." That was the moment something in me snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. We did everything right. It's not the first we. In her mind, my college acceptance wasn't my achievement it. It was our joint project, and I had failed to deliver the desired outcome. For the first time, I saw our relationship with perfect clarity. I wasn't a person to high. It was a project, a reflection, extension of her own ambitions. That night, after she had gone to bed, I sat alone in our pristine kitchen and allowed myself to imagine a different path. What if instead of continuing to chase her approval, I built a life based on my own values? What if I defined success for myself? The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When I announced my plan to attend community college, my mother's reaction was everything I expected. First came disbelief, then anger, then a calculated campaign to change my mind. She arranged meetings with her influential friends. She presented brochures from acceptable four-year universities that might still have openings. When those tactics failed, she resorted to emotional manipulation. "After everything I've sacrificed for you," she said one night, her voice trembling with what I now recognize was mostly performative emotion. "This is how you repay me, by throwing away your potential." But for once I stood firm. "I'm not throwing anything away," I replied. "I'm just taking a different route." 2 weeks later, I moved out. My studio apartment was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette so small I could touch both walls at once, and a bathroom where the shower sprayed directly onto the toilet. But it was mine. I paid for it with money from my new job at TechFlare, a startup where I managed their social media accounts. The first night alone in that tiny space, sitting on my second-hand futon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. No one was measuring my accomplishments. No one was plotting my future. For the first time, I could breathe. Riverside Community College wasn't on anyone's list of prestigious institutions. The campus was a collection of utilitarian buildings surrounding a modest quad. The library was 1/10 the size of Princeton's. But for my very first class, I knew I had made the right choice. My Economics 101 professor, Dr. Rivera, didn't care about my SAT scores or my high school pedigree. She cared about whether I understood the concept of opportunity cost and could apply it to real-world scenarios. My classmates didn't form study groups based on social connections or family names. They formed them based on schedules and genuine interest in helping each other succeed. One of those classmates was Miguel, a 35-year-old former warehouse manager who sat next to me in accounting class. When I struggled with a particularly complex problem set, he stayed after class to walk me through it step by step. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, genuinely confused by his generosity. He looked surprised by the question. "'Cause that's what we do here," he said simply. "We lift each other up." That concept, lifting each other up, rather than competing for limited spots at the top, was revolutionary to me. In my mother's world, someone else's success meant less room for your own. At Riverside, success was seen as collective, not zero-sum. Over the next 3 years, I thrived in this new environment. Without the crushing pressure to be perfect, I discovered what I actually enjoyed. I joined the Student Business Association not because it would look good on a resume, but because I was genuinely interested in the guest speakers and networking opportunities. I volunteered at a local financial literacy program because I believed in its mission, not because I needed community service hours. And my grades, they were perfect not because I was terrified of disappointing my mother, but because I was genuinely engaged with the material. Dr. Rivera noticed the transformation. After I presented my midterm project in advanced economic theory and analysis of market failures in healthcare systems, she asked me to stay after class. "You've changed," she observed, perching on the edge of her desk. "When you first came here, you were so tense, so focused on the grade rather than the learning. And now, you're asking questions no one else thinks to ask. You're making connections across disciplines." What happened? I considered deflecting with a joke, but her genuine interest deserved honesty. "I found my own reason for being here," I said, "not someone else's." She nodded slowly. "That's the most valuable education anyone can receive." Then she leaned forward, her expression serious. "Alex, have you thought about where you'll go after Riverside? With your academic record and leadership experience, you could transfer almost anywhere." The thought had crossed my mind, but I had deliberately avoided dwelling on it. The pain of those rejection letters was still fresh, even 2 years later. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe State University, somewhere affordable?" Dr. Rivera's eyebrows shot up. "State is a fine school," she said carefully. "But with your abilities, you should aim higher, ain't much higher." That conversation planted a seed. Over the next few weeks, I found myself browsing transfer requirements for top business programs. Harvard's special transfer admission program caught my not because of its prestige, because its emphasis on diverse life experiences and demonstrated leadership aligned with what I now valued in education. The application deadline was 3 months away. Did I dare try again? I risk another? Rejection. Put myself through that emotional ringer one more time? The difference was, this time it would be my choice, my application, my authentic voice. I started small, just gathering information, telling myself I was only exploring options. But soon, I was drafting essays during lunch breaks at work, reaching out to professors for recommendation letters, and studying for the GMAT in the early morning hours before class. My personal statement was nothing like the polished, strategic essays my mother's consultant had crafted. Instead, I wrote honestly about my journey, about finding my purpose and voice at community college, about the mentors and classmates who had shaped my understanding of business as a force for good, about my genuine passion for creating economic systems that served people rather than exploiting them. One passage in particular still stands out in my memory. My path to Harvard Business School has been unconventional. Where others might see detours, I see valuable terrain that has shaped my perspective and honed my determination. Community college taught me that true education transcends institutions and credentials. It's about transformation. The diverse experiences and perspectives of my classmates at Riverside have given me insights no textbook could provide. I bring to Harvard not just academic excellence, but a tested resilience and a profound appreciation for the democratizing power of education. When I submitted my application, I felt none of the anxiety that had characterized my previous college. Application experience. Whatever the outcome, I had represented myself honestly. I had nothing to be ashamed of. The weeks that followed were busy with final projects, work responsibilities, and planning for graduation. I deliberately avoided thinking about Harvard, focusing instead on the achievement at hand completing my associate's degree with honors. Then came the email. Congratulations in bold black letters. Acceptance to Harvard Business School. Prestigious fellowship that would make it financially possible. Official validation of the path I had chosen. My first instinct was to call my mother to prove to her that my way had worked, to force her to acknowledge my achievement. But something stopped me. This moment wasn't about her. It never had been. This was my journey, my triumph. Sharing it with her immediately would only reduce it to the same old dynamic, her approval as the ultimate measure of my worth. Instead, I called Dr. Rivera. When I told her the news, she whooped so loudly, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I knew it, she exclaimed. I absolutely knew you could do it. Then I called my Aunt Helen, who cried happy tears and insisted on taking me out for ice cream. Just as she had when I won my 6th grade science fair. I am so damn proud of you, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Not because it's Harvard, but because you did this your way. For 2 weeks, I kept the news from my mother. It wasn't out of spite or a desire to ambush her. It was because I needed time to fully own this achievement before subjecting it to her judgment. I needed to know in my bones that her reaction, whatever it might be, couldn't diminish what I had accomplished. The night before my graduation party, I sat alone in my small apartment, the Harvard acceptance letter in my hands. Tomorrow would be a reckoning of sorts, not just between my mother and me, but between two competing visions of success and fulfillment. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Confirmed final headcount with Castellinos. 40 guests. The blue blazer I sent, not that brown one you have. Even now, controlling the narrative, dictating the details. Viewing my graduation celebration as a reflection on her, rather than a recognition of my accomplishment, I placed the acceptance letter in a simple white envelope. No matter what happened tomorrow, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer the person who had left her house 3 years ago young, uncertain, and desperate for approval. I'd become someone stronger, someone who understood that true success isn't measured by prestigious names or external validation, but by the courage to define and pursue your own path. As I sealed the envelope, I felt not anger or vindictiveness toward my mother, but something more complex, a mixture of gratitude for the drive she had instilled in me, sadness for what our relationship could have been, and hope that perhaps this moment might open a door to something healthier between us. What I didn't know then was that the moment in the restaurant would be just the beginning of a much longer, more difficult, and ultimately more rewarding journey for both of us. That gasp when she saw the Harvard letterhead would be the first crack in a wall that had stood between us for 22 years, a wall built of expectations, disappointments, and misunderstandings. The transformation that followed would teach me the most important lesson of all. that sometimes the greatest act of love is holding up a mirror that reflects the truth, even when that truth is painful to see. The morning of my graduation party dawned bright and clear. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting the tie beneath the blue blazer my mother had sent her latest attempt to mold me into her image of success. The blazer was beautiful, expertly tailored, and completely impersonal. Like everything, from my mother, it came with invisible strings attached. My phone buzzed with messages from well-wishers Dr. Rivera, classmates from Riverside, colleagues from Tech Flair. Their words were genuine, their pride in me uncomplicated by expectations or agendas. I carried those messages with me like armor as I prepared to face my mother's world once more. Before leaving my apartment, I tucked the Harvard acceptance letter into my inner pocket, feeling its weight against my chest like a secret weapon. Not a weapon to hurt, but to reveal to show once and for all that there were many paths to excellence. Mine was just as valid as hers. What I didn't realize then was how much courage it would take to deliver that message, or how much that moment would change not just my future but my understanding of my past. The silent war between my mother and me had begun years before that. Dramatic moment at Castellino's. It's not with shouting matches or slam doors, but with quiet acts of rebellion that built slowly over time. It's like water gradually carving a canyon through stone. My first real taste of independence came during my second semester at Riverside. I had just aced my midterms a perfect 100% in economics, 98% in accounting, and 99% in business communications. In my mother's world, these would have been cause for muted acknowledgement at best, certainly not celebration. That's what's expected, she would have said, already moving on to the next hurdle. But at Riverside, achievement was celebrated differently. Dr. Rivera announced my economics score. To the class leading a spontaneous round of applause, Professor Winters from accounting asked to keep my exam as an example for future students. And in business communications, Ms. Taylor wrote simply, "Outstanding insight. You have a unique voice. Never lose it." That evening, my study group insisted on taking me out for pizza. We crowded around a table at Gino's, a hole-in-the-wall pizzeria with checkered tablecloths and the best garlic knots in town. Miguel, the former warehouse manager who had become a true friend, raised his soda cup in a toast. "Alex," he said, his voice warm with genuine pride, who just proved that hard work and brains are an unbeatable combination.
Ow.
Everyone cheered. Leela, a single mother who studied between shifts as a nurse, gave me a side hug. "You're making us all look good, kid," she said with a laugh. I looked around at these faces, classmates who had become something like family. None of them cared about my mother's status or connections, and none of them measured my worth by my prestigious associations. They cared about who I was, what I contributed, and how I showed up for them. In that moment, surrounded by plastic cups and paper plates instead of crystal and fine china, I felt something I had rarely experienced in my mother's world: belonging. Not because of what I had accomplished, but because of who I was. The contrast was stark and revealing. In my mother's carefully curated social circle, relationships were transactional. People were valued for their utility, their connections, their status. At Riverside, relationships were built on mutual support and genuine regard. This revelation sparked the first major step in my silent rebellion. I stopped attending my mother's carefully orchestrated social events. No more charity. Galas where I was expected to charm her business associates. No more Sunday brunches with her inner circle of wealthy friends. No more mandatory family dinners where she critiqued everything from my posture to my career plans. When she called to demand an explanation, I offered the perfect excuse. "I have to study." "Mom, you always said education comes first." She couldn't argue with that, though I could practically hear her teeth grinding through the phone. What I didn't tell her was that while I was indeed studying, I was also building a life that had nothing to do with her vision for me. I joined a community garden where I spent Saturday mornings with my hands in the dirt, learning from elderly neighbors about how to nurture living things. I volunteered at a financial literacy program for high school students, teaching them basics about budgeting and saving that I wished someone had taught me. I started dating someone my mother would never approve of, Darius, He's a brilliant computer science major who had grown up in foster care and worked nights as a security guard too. Pay for school. He had no family connections, no trust fund, no pedigree. What he did have was integrity, ambition, and a kind of authentic warmth that made me feel valued for exactly who I was. Our relationship was another secret I kept from my mother. Out of shame, but out of a desire to protect something genuine from her inevitable criticism and manipulation. 6 months into our relationship, Darius and I were having dinner at his modest apartment when he asked the question I had been dreading. "When am I going to meet your mom?" he asked, passing me a plate of his famous homemade enchiladas. "You've met half my foster siblings by now," focused intently on my food, avoiding his eyes. "It's complicated," I said finally. "My mother isn't exactly welcoming." Darius set down his fork. "Because I'm not good enough for her daughter?" His voice was calm, but I could hear the hurt beneath it. "No," I said quickly. "Because no one is good enough for her daughter, not even her daughter." I hadn't meant to say it so bluntly, but once the words were out, I couldn't take them back. And I realized I didn't want to. For perhaps the first time, I had articulated the fundamental truth of my relationship with my mother. Darius reached across the table and took my hand. "Alex," he said gently, "you know that's not normal, right? Parents are supposed to think their kids are amazing just for existing." His words hit me like a physical blow. Was that true? Was I supposed to be loved unconditionally, not just when I performed to expectations? The concept was so foreign, it seemed almost fantastical. "My mom's not big on normal," I said, attempting a laugh that came out more like a hiccup. "Then maybe it's time to show her what she's missing," Darius suggested. "Not for her sake, but for yours." That conversation was the catalyst for the next phase of my silent rebellion. Instead of hiding my new life from my mother, I began to strategically reveal parts of it. Not in a confrontational way, but in small, deliberate glimpses that challenged her narrative about who I was and what I was capable of. When she asked about my grades, I sent her not just my transcript, but the paper on sustainable business practices. That had earned me recognition from the business faculty. When she inquired about my social connections, her code for networking with influential people, I told her about the mentorship program I had started at Riverside, pairing first-year students with business professionals in the community. Her responses were telling. She ignored or dismissed anything that didn't fit her preconceived notions. The award-winning paper received a cursory, interesting. The mentorship program elicited a tepid that sounds time-consuming, but I persisted. Each small revelation was a pebble against the windshield of her perception, creating tiny cracks in her worldview. And with each dismissal, I grew more certain that I was on the right path. My path, not hers. The Harvard application was the culmination of this quiet rebellion. Unlike my high school applications, which had been orchestrated and overseen by my mother-like military campaigns, this one was entirely my own. Every essay, every recommendation, every form was completed without her knowledge or input. When I needed advice, I turned to Dr. Rivera, who had become both mentor and friend. She reviewed my essays not to make them conform to some admissions officer's expectations, but to ensure they truly reflected my voice and vision. "Remember," she told me during one late-night review session in her office, "Harvard doesn't need another perfect automaton. They need you with all your unique experiences and perspectives. Don't hide your journey. Celebrate it." Taking her advice, I wrote candidly about my time at Riverside, about the diverse classmates who had expanded my understanding of business beyond profit, margins to include social impact and human dignity. I wrote about learning to define success on my own terms, about discovering that true leadership comes not from authority but from service. In what became the heart of my application, I described a specific moment of clarity, organizing a financial wellness workshop for residents at a local shelter for victims of domestic violence. Watching women who had survived unimaginable trauma regain a sense of control through understanding basic financial principles had transformed my view of business education's purpose. In that church basement, I wrote, watching a woman who had fled her home with nothing but her children and the clothes on her back create her first budget. I understood that financial knowledge isn't just about wealth accumulation, it's about freedom. The skills I've gained at Riverside have value not because they might lead to a prestigious job title or a high salary, because they can be tools of empowerment for those who need them most. This was a vision of business so fundamentally different from my mother's cutthroat corporate worldview that it felt like a declaration of independence. In her world, business was about competition, dominance, and wealth acquisition. In mine, it was increasingly about service, empowerment, and creating systems that worked for everyone, not just those at the top. The day I submitted my Harvard application was oddly anticlimactic. No fanfare, no announcement, just a quiet click of the submit button in my apartment late one night after a long shift at Tech Flare. I closed my laptop and went to bed, oddly at peace, regardless of the outcome. For the next 2 months, I immersed myself in my final semester at Riverside. I led a student team in developing a microfinance program for local small businesses. I co-authored a research paper with Dr. Rivera on economic resilience in marginalized communities. I planned the Student Business Association's annual conference, securing speakers from major companies and innovative startups alike. I was so busy living my life that I almost forgot about Harvard, but not quite. The application remained a secret hope, tucked away in a private corner of my heart. Then came the email that would change everything. I was at Tech Flare, designing a social media campaign for their new app launch, when my phone buzzed with a notification. Seeing the Harvard domain and the sender's address, my heart stuttered to a stop, then raced ahead at double speed. With trembling fingers, I opened the email. The first word I saw was congratulations, and for a moment I thought I might faint right there at my desk. I quickly scanned the rest of the message, key phrases jumping out. Impressed with your academic achievements and leadership. It's demonstrated exceptional resilience and intellectual growth. Pleased to offer you the Horizon Fellowship. The Horizon Fellowship. I knew what that meant. It was Harvard's most prestigious award for transfer students. Covering nearly all expenses and providing special mentorship opportunities, it was given to only 5 students each year. I excused myself from the office and found a quiet corner in the stairwell where I could process what had just happened. I had done it. Without my mother's connections, without her carefully orchestrated resume building activities, without her strategic influence, I had earned a place at one of the most selective institutions in the world. Tina had done it. My way, on my terms, authentically. My first call wasn't to my mother. It wasn't even to Darius or Dr. Rivera. It was to Miguel, the first person at Riverside who had shown me what true educational community looked like. I got in, I said when. He answered, my voice shaking with emotion. Harvard. There was a moment of silence, then a whoop so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I knew it, he shouted. Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say they'd be crazy not to take you? His unrestrained joy was exactly what I needed, pure celebration, without an ounce of the of course you did entitlement that would have characterized my mother's response. Over the next hour, I made similar calls to the people who had truly supported my journey. Dr. Rivera, my Aunt Helen, Leela, and finally Darius, who insisted on taking me out for a proper celebration dinner. We're going somewhere fancy, he declared. The kind of place with cloth napkins and more than one fork? I laughed. You hate those places. But you deserve to celebrate in style, he insisted. And I want to see you dressed up and glowing with your success. That night, at a restaurant far less pretentious than Castellino's, but still elegant in its own way, Darius raised a glass to me. To Alex, he said, his eyes shining with pride, who proved that authenticity beats strategy every time. As we celebrated, the question of when and how to tell my mother loomed large. Darius, ever direct, addressed it head-on over dessert. So when are you going to drop this bomb on Eleanor the Terrible, he asked, using his nickname for my mother. I sighed, tracing patterns in the chocolate sauce on my plate. At the graduation party, I think. She's invited all her friends, positioned herself to take credit for my stepping stone at community college. It feels poetically just to reveal the truth there. Darius studied me carefully. Is this about justice or revenge? It was a fair question, and one I had been asking myself. Was I withholding this news to maximize its impact? Was there a part of me that wanted to see my mother humiliated the way she had humiliated me countless times? Neither, I said finally. It's about reclaiming my narrative. For my entire life, she's controlled the story of who I am and what I'm capable of. This is me taking that power back. Darius nodded slowly. Just remember, he said, reaching for my hand, the best revenge isn't humiliating her. It's living so well that her opinion becomes irrelevant. Those words stayed with me in the weeks leading up to graduation. I carried the Harvard acceptance letter with me everywhere, not as a weapon, but as a talisman, a tangible reminder that I had created a path for myself that was both different from and equal to my mother's. The day of my graduation ceremony was surreal. My mother didn't attend the actual ceremony. She claimed an important business meeting. But I knew the truth. Riverside Community College's gymnasium wasn't prestigious enough to merit her presence. My Aunt Helen, Darius, and even Dr. Rivera sat in the audience instead, cheering loudly when my name was called. As I walked across that stage, accepting my associate's degree with highest honors, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not of my academic program, but of a personal transformation. I had entered Riverside as someone defined by rejection and others' expectations. I was leaving as someone defined by my own choices and values. The party at Castellino's that evening would be the final scene in this particular chapter of my life. I arrived early, wanting a moment to center myself before the performance began. The private dining room was impeccably decorated, fresh flowers on every table. A banner congratulating me on my graduation, though notably not mentioning Riverside by name. And even a small display of my academic awards carefully curated by my mother to emphasize achievement while de-emphasizing the community college context. My mother arrived precisely on time, dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than my entire tuition. She air-kissed my cheeks, careful not to smudge. Her perfect makeup. "You look presentable," she said, which in her language was high praise. Though I still think the other blazer would have been better. I smiled, feeling oddly calm. "Thank you for arranging all this, Mom. It looks beautiful." She waved away my gratitude. Of course, Deachens celebrate educational milestones properly. She lowered her voice. "So next time, we'll have a more suitable venue to celebrate. I've already spoken to my contact at State University about expediting your application for fall admission." There it was, the assumption that she was still in control of my narrative, that my future was hers to determine. Once that assumption would have filled me with resentment. Now, knowing what was in my pocket, I felt only a strange compassion. How limited her vision was, how constrained her understanding of possibility. As guests began to arrive, I circulated through the room, accepting congratulations with genuine gratitude. My Aunt Helen hugged me tightly, whispering, "I am so proud of you, sweetheart. So proud." Darius arrived looking handsome in a suit I knew he had borrowed from his foster brother. My mother, spotting him from across the room, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. It was the first time they had been in the same space, and her deliberate non-acknowledgement spoke volumes. The dinner itself was exquisite. 5 courses of perfectly prepared cuisine that I barely tasted. I was too focused on what was coming, on the moment that was building with every passing minute. When my mother stood and tapped her knife against her champagne flute, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, commanding attention as always. "I'd like to say a few words," she announced, her voice carrying effortlessly. "First, thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate with us." She paused, surveying the room with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "As you know, Alex has completed a program at Riverside Community College." The way she said it, like describing a summer school course rather than a rigorous academic degree, made something harden in my chest. But I kept my expression neutral, waiting. "While this is certainly a step," she continued, "I want to assure everyone that Alex will be moving on to better things. I've already spoken to some contacts at State University about possible enrollment for the fall semester." My head snapped up. This was news to me. She had done what? Because let's be honest, she said, with a small laugh that invited others to join in. Community college doesn't really count as real college. It's more like college with training wheels. And there it was. The dismissal. The devaluation. The public undermining of what I had accomplished. It wasn't a surprise. But hearing it stated so baldly, so casually, still felt like a physical blow. The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for my reaction. Would I burst into tears? Would I storm out? Would I cause a scene that would give them something to gossip about at their next dinner party? Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I smiled. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "Thank you for sharing your perspective, Mom," I said. And I was shocked at how steady my voice sounded. I walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of her. Her triumphant expression flickered, confusion creeping in at my lack of an emotional reaction. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out the envelope I had been carrying for 2 weeks. I placed it gently on the table in front of her. "Before this goes any further," I said, my voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear, "you should read this." Then I turned and walked toward the door of the private dining room. As I pushed it open, I heard it a gasp so sharp and sudden it sounded like someone had been punched. It wasn't just surprise, it was shock. It was the sound of my mother's carefully constructed narrative about me crumbling to dust. The Harvard seal on the acceptance letter was unmistakable, as were the words, "We are pleased to inform you," in bold black type at the top of the page. But it was the scholarship offer, the prestigious Horizon Fellowship that would cover almost all of my expenses, that had caused her to make that sound, because it was the same fellowship she had applied for 25 years ago and been denied. As I stepped out into the main restaurant, I felt oddly weightless. For the first time in my life, I had taken control of my own story. I had defied not just my mother's expectations, but her fundamental assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of. Whatever came next, whether fury or pride or some complicated mixture of both, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never again allow someone else to define my worth or dictate my path. The envelope wasn't just an acceptance letter. It was a declaration of independence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.